Hi, I'm Todd Nash, President of Oregon Cattlemen's Association, here today with Tina Kotek, Gubernatorial candidate for the great state of Oregon. So, Tina, I really appreciate you coming here today, and we're going to jump right into some questions here and get rolling. And if we have a little time at the end, we'll let you have about 5 minutes to talk about your campaign and your goals for Oregon. So. Um, Starting off here, cattle are consistently in the top of the agriculture commodities in the state of Oregon. How do you intend to track the health and viability of this industry?
Well, that's a great question. Well, thank you, Todd, and everyone with the association for the opportunity to be here. My general approach to particularly areas where I have not spent a lot of time is to go to the experts, right? Depending on the agency, certainly your association to get a sense. My experience over the years as Speaker of the House has been, you want to bring in both state agency experts like Department of Ag, stakeholders like the Cattlemen's Association, other maybe some other folks, maybe at OSU Extension, or folks in our university setting that track your industry and get the feedback on how you're doing. You are an important part of the agricultural economy here in Oregon, and very much appreciate the longevity of the people who have been ranchers over the years, really promoting this industry, because I do think it's also important as a value-added product to promote outside of Oregon and internationally. It's also very important to understand how the industry is doing. So for me, it's making sure that whoever's on my team following natural resource issues and economic issues are talking to the right people to make sure that we understand how things are going. I know, sorry, I just got a phone call. I know I gotta mute my phone. For example, when we had that issue a few years ago, when we had GMO show up in the wheat and how that impacted international things, it's like, everybody's got to come to the table when there's, potentially something that could impact the industry. So that's, it's not very specific, but that's how I would approach all things, that I might not have any personal expertise on.
Okay, appreciate that. What do you make it a priority to attend our mid-year and annual meetings?
Well, if I can, I know I first of all appreciate the invite earlier this year to come out to John Day. Just didn't work out schedule-wise. The hardest part for a candidate is your calendar and your time. I was joking the other day that if somebody gives me a jetpack, I could go to places a lot easier. And it's just really hard. But I do look forward when I'm governor. My goal is to be a governor for the entire state. And I would love to, meet with people in their pre-established meetings. You don't need a fancy new meeting for me. If you've got a meeting and I can come and it makes sense for us to have a dialogue, I will make it work.
Okay, thank you. Both of our U.S. senators have committed to getting around and visiting all 36 counties every year. If elected, would you do the same?
I love that commitment that both Senator Wyden and Senator Merkley have made. And I'd have to look at whether that, it gets a little more complicated, I think, as governor to make sure you can go to all places. But I do want to say that my goal is to not be spending a lot of time in Salem. And I think being intentional about visiting every part of our state, and maybe it has to be something like visiting every county, every year. But I'll want to stay open to that, because not knowing how complicated that is to do as a governor, I want to make sure I understand that before I commit to that. But getting outside of Salem on a regular basis, being in community with people around the state is a goal and an objective of mine, because we have to bring the state together. And that means actually being with people where they live and where they work.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to switch gears a little bit and talk about water. So what would you do to prepare Oregon for drought resilience?
It's a really good question. I think one of the biggest natural resource issues, I think the biggest, is water. Making sure that with the limited resource we have, and it's not endless, making sure that all users can access the water in a way that multiple stakeholders can be successful. One of the things that I did as Speaker of the House is I created a water committee. I know you're very familiar with the work of Representative Ken Helm. I think he's been a wonderful legislator in working in all parts of the state, trying to understand our water issues. Because it's not just about one thing. It's both efficient and effective conservation. It's about understanding how much water we do have, whether it's groundwater or in stream. There is a lot we have to understand. I think one of the things that I've heard from both Representative Helm and Representative Owens in conversations we've had just in the past couple of months is making sure we understand how much water we have, because if we start giving away more water rights on paper that we can't actually sustain, that is a challenge for all of us. I want to make sure also that the state, with the help of the federal government, USDA and others, to make sure we can get more resources to all of our irrigation districts and other special districts who work on water, to make sure we can have the ability to have more efficient irrigation methods so we can conserve our water. And my commitment to you is when we start having more conversations about water and usage and understanding how we best manage this limited resource, you're going to be at the table. We have to have everybody at the table. Users have to understand they need to put their needs on the table. And we have to talk globally about how we as a state can continue to support ag and natural resources and still have water for everybody. And I am concerned. We know the world is changing. Our drought has been long standing at this point. It's going to continue to be a challenge for us. And we're just all going to have to roll up our sleeves and just have a very coordinated conversation about how we move forward.
Okay, thank you. Specifically, who are your top picks to replace Tom Byler at Oregon Water Resources? And Alexis Taylor is leaving us as well. Do you have picks for those offices?
I appreciate the specific question. I do not. I do not have a pick for any of my, I have not sat down and said, these are the folks in any of the agencies who either have vacancies or people who might need to shift in terms of management. My commitment, though, is to make sure when we start looking at those lists and trying to figure out who should be taking over particular agencies, I'm going to ask around and ask people, like, who do you think? Who's on your list? Because I'm going to need some suggestions. But right now, I don't have a list.
Okay. What do you think Oregon Water Resources Department is doing right? And in what areas could they improve?
Well, I think as we see in all state agencies, one of the reasons that I'm running for governor is to make sure that agencies feel supported, agencies have the resources they need in terms of staff and grants or whatever it is they need to be consumer oriented, to be working effectively and efficiently for Oregonians around the state. And I've heard a lot of folks who have been very supportive of the work that the Water Resources Department has done. And frankly, some concerned that they're being asked to do a lot with very limited tools, very limited resources. And I think you all know, if you've been following state budgets as I have over the years, because of all the needs of the state funds, our natural resource agencies tend to get kind of at the bottom of the list, right? We have been trying over the last couple biennium, because as revenues have stabilized and strengthened over the last couple biennium, we've tried to put more general fund money into agencies like Water Resources, because we need to do studies. We need to make sure that permits can be moved, efficiently and effectively. Nothing is worse for someone who's out in the private sector saying, I know I need to do this thing, but I'm being told it's going to take so many months before I can even get what I need from the state agency. We have to improve that. One of my goals as governor is to make sure we put customer service at the top of the list, making sure we resource state government in a way that they can actually be very responsive to the needs of the private sector. That, I feel, is the bargain we make when we say, look, we're here as state government, we collect revenue to serve people. Our promise to you is to make sure we can serve you well and efficiently and effectively. So in terms of Water Resources, I know we've been asking them to do a lot over the last couple biennium, new studies, convening new conversations. I want to make sure they have what they need to do the job. It is going to be very important for the future of our state and our economic development to to have water managed well with significant stakeholder input so we can continue to have this resource for the future. And we've got a lot of work to do there. And that agency, I want to be very supportive of it and help them, be the leader they need to be in this state.
Okay, thank you. What will you do to help the Klamath Basin and their water crisis down there?
As you know, very complex situation. I think the very first thing to do is learn the history, talk to the folks who have been working on the ground there, talking to the folks both at the federal and state level who have been working to make progress in the basin. Last year, I think it was the special session last December, this is why I was still speaker, we made sure we moved a package to the Klamath Basin to help on a short-term basis to help us get through the summer season. And these are long-term issues. So I would be getting ahead of myself and over my skis if I had a specific idea of what we could fix it, because there's no magic wand for this. This is a very challenging situation. But I am hopeful because I believe in the ingenuity and commitment of Oregonians to figure this out, because we got to figure it out. And, certainly would love to hear what your particular perspectives there are. I also want to say upfront, it's very important to work with the tribes. Tribes have, as the courts have said, historical responsibility as well as the ability on water rights. We all have to work together. And I think that is a particularly strong role for the governor and the governor's office to play, to facilitate, to mediate, to bring people together. And I will make sure that whoever I hire to work on my natural resource issues is well-versed in the issues there, so we are a help, not an impediment to progress.
Okay. The next question, what is your position on state agencies taking in-stream water rights?
Can you tell me, what do you mean by taking in-stream water rights?
And so ODF&W, Oregon Parks, and DEQ have the authority to apply for in-stream water rights. And those are the water in-stream that hasn't been applied for already through other application. And so they can go in there and they can take them for a number of reasons. And then once those are taken up by those agencies, they're no longer available for any other entity except for those state agencies' functions.
Got it. And is that, sorry, Nash, is that a common practice?
It's happened throughout the state. Most recently, in Lake County, ODF&W has indicated that they're going to be applying for some there. In the southwest portion of the state, there's been quite a lot that has been done there. And word on the street is there's about 400 applications throughout the state that are going to be applied for within the next couple of years.
Okay, well, thank you. Thanks for giving me a little bit more detail. As you can tell from my question, it's not something I'm, eminently familiar with. Here's my general take from the nature of this question is, I believe in balance. I believe in trying to balance multiple interests at once. I do believe the state has a whole lot of responsibility when it comes to making sure our natural resources are there for the future. And we don't want to run everything. We don't want to, have, authority over everything, because I don't think that is a good balance with what happens in the private sector, right? So I'm not sure what the answer is here, other than to say, I would approach it with a balanced perspective to make sure that we are managing multiple interests, because that at the end of the day is the role of state government. As a representation of the entire state and of all the people, we have to think about all the different things that our natural resources provide, but to do it in a way that balances to not inhibit, private sector development. So it's a balance. So I'm sorry I don't have a more specific answer, but I obviously have to learn more about that.
Okay. switching gears a little bit, talk about taxes. So the corporate activity tax or the commercial activity tax has brought in some huge revenues to the state.
Mhm.
If you had to vote again, would you vote to support or not support that bill?
Thank you for the question. I am a very strong supporter of what we did around the corporate activities tax, commercial activities tax, the CAT tax, because it was directly connected to dedicate funding to our schools. Now, we're now in second or third year of collection, maybe second year. There's certainly an opportunity to say, hey, did we get it right? Is it causing any unintended consequences? My primary goal around the CAT tax is to make sure that the Student Success Act, of which it was connected to, is actually producing the outcomes that we need it to. Yes, it's producing revenue because it was designed to do that, $1 billion more per year for pre-K through 12, making sure that both early childhood and our K through 12 schools are actually seeing a benefit from those additional dollars. Now, many of you know, because you're all really active in your communities, that the Student Success Act required community-driven plans to talk about increasing graduation rates, fully funding career and technical education, making sure students have access to more school counselors and school nurses and things that will help them be successful. I want to make sure that every student in our state, no matter where they live, has a good school, is on a path to success, that they can graduate and have a plan for their future. The Student Success Act got us to addressing a 30-year-old problem of not having enough resources into our schools. Now, as a superintendent of public instruction, hopefully as the next governor, is making sure that we're actually seeing what we're paying for. That is important to me. And we're going to have a lot more active conversations with districts, particularly our very large districts, who really need to, have better outcomes for their students. So the answer to the question, just to reiterate, is I supported that tax. I supported the Student Success Act. As governor, I got to make sure that Student Success Act is producing the outcomes we're paying for, because that's the promise we made. Money in has to actually do something. So I'm bullish on it, and I want to make sure we get what we're paying for.
Okay. Switching gears again here on a private lands issue. What is your position on the state acquiring more lands from private landowners?
Are we doing that? Sorry, I don't mean to be.
Yeah.
How much are we doing that? Because and what's the reason for that?
Oftentimes we see ODF&W acquiring lands for wildlife, some for parks, and so yeah, there is some acquisitions that take place.
Well, thank you for that. Well, and over the years in the legislature, having been on the budget committee and Full Ways and Means, easements, new acquisitions for parks, that's a really good point. There should be criteria of why we're doing it. And I think what I would ask of the agencies, if there's a controversy about acquisitions, it's like, why are we doing it? Who was engaged? What are we trying to achieve? Those are all the questions as a governor I would want to understand before taking any position on a particular land. What I have noticed in my years in the legislature is every land situation is very specific, right? There's no conversation about a piece of property or a piece of land ever looks the same, right? So there has to be reasons for it. Who's impacted? Why are we doing it? Is there a long-term benefit to Oregonians that we're doing this? Or is, we always have to weigh all of these things, I think, when these things are proposed, and definitely would want to look at it with that lens to make sure we're making the right choices.
Okay. How would you work to protect livestock from predator depredations?
It's a good question. I like to rely on our agencies who follow this, hopefully are following the science. And I also am a big fan of asking over the years, well, what does OSU think? What do the experts at OSU Extension think? We have tried to find some balance in the legislature of both having wildlife management plans that are science-based, but also address issues when there is predation, if there is, property loss and other things like that, making sure there's a plan to compensate. And, I have support over the years, more resources going into, for example, when wolves are attacking and taking livestock, supporting those things. So again, going back to a balance between, having a science-driven wildlife management plan and also, understanding that sometimes we have to, compensate when things don't go the way they're supposed to. So, and I've been very aware and very appreciative of the Cattlemen's Association over the years, providing their input, giving their perspective, talking about what it's like on the ground and what is needed, so we can, have a balanced approach. So thank you for being so engaged on that. And, if we don't have the right tools out there, we need to expand the tools. I'm definitely open to that conversation.
Okay, appreciate that. Similarly, what measures would you take to mitigate damage caused by elk, feral horses, and other animals on high-value cropland and range pasture land?
Yeah, I would turn to the agencies and say, what's the plan? What are the approaches? And one of the things I think, it's not just what I have found over the years, there's not always one way to do things. So I'm always like, well, give me the best options, and then let's talk about it. And let's talk, what do the stakeholders think about how to do this? I'm very aware that particularly elk on the coast and how they have, been particularly encroaching into urban areas as well and causing damage as well. So, I don't have any specifics on that, but again, whatever, consulting the experts and then looking at all the options and making an informed decision by talking to everybody involved.
Okay. Moving on, public lands. So 52% of Oregon is under federal management. We see proposed wilderness study areas, monuments, and most recently, the Rivers Democracy Act. What would your position be on these? Or as governor, would you weigh in on them at all?
I'd probably have to be on a case-by-case basis. I am one of those, and I think everyone who's watching this probably agree. We love the bounty and beauty of our state, right? The fact that we have, I grew up on the East Coast. When I first moved out to Oregon back in '87, just blown away by the beauty of our state and what we have and so balancing how you sustain that. Now, public lands in terms of monuments and parks, that is a way to guarantee that beauty and for future generations. So it's both the long-term conversation and the short-term need that, again, you have to balance. But, I haven't personally at this point weighed in on any of those things as speaker. I don't think, can't recall. But again, I don't weigh in until I've talked to everybody to try to figure out what's going on. So, but I also understand that there's a long-term benefit for some of these actions. And so we're just trying to figure out how we can make it work when these things get proposed.
Okay. Legislatively, agriculture, the portion of agriculture in the state budget is historically one of the smallest items, yet is usually one of the first to see cuts. What can we expect from you as governor?
Yeah, well, the good thing that in my years being speaker is we have developed some very strong reserves. And I'm very proud of that. I had the unfortunate task of chairing the Human Services Subcommittee of Ways and Means during the Great Recession. And, when the bottom fell out of our revenue structure and we had to make significant cuts in those areas that tend to provide, the bulk of state services, human services, education, public safety, those were very difficult things. And then, as you noted, natural resource agencies, which are, very small, but cuts have like a deeper impact because they are such smaller budgets. And if the amount of general fund in there is taken away, it's significant. So my goal over the last decade has been to make sure that we have solid reserves. So if we ever have something like as bad as a Great Recession, that we're able to respond to that. So I think the message, everyone, is we have built up to almost 10% of our general fund revenue in reserves, rainy day fund and educational stability fund, to help us manage significant downturns in revenue. So that's a plus. So I just want to say that is important to me. Going back to my previous comments about making sure state agencies can function in a very customer service way, we have to stop taking the legs out from our agencies to try to do the work they're doing. Because when we do that, they have impacts. We see this in forestry. We've been so focused on addressing wildfires that, some of the other core functions of forestry were just not happening. That's why I worked so hard in 2021 to make sure we had this significant comprehensive package on wildfire prevention and mitigation, so we could have new resources, so we weren't always depending on the existing staff in the agencies to do all this work. We cannot over rely on fees. Our natural resource agencies have a significant non-general fund, fee-based part of their budget. You start pushing fees too high, or you are overly reliant on fees, it is going to impact how you do business as a state government. So there has to be a robust commitment from the state for all its agencies, including our smaller natural resource agencies, to have a solid, stable, ongoing source of general fund investment so they can do their job. So my commitment, as someone who's worked on budgets for years, I understand the puts and takes, but I also understand the consequences if we make bad choices. With those reserves, hopefully, while I'm governor, we don't have to see those kind of budget cuts. And I would definitely make sure that we don't significantly impair our natural resource agencies. They have to be able to function, because frankly, we're still digging out from the cuts we made 10 years ago. I don't want to go back to that, because we need these agencies to function and function well for Oregonians.
Great, thank you. JFK said of farmers, he said they're the only entity that pays retail, sells wholesale, and pays the freight both ways. And I probably butchered that, but that's certainly the case. Cattle producers pay for their current ODA brand program. And so would you consider or be amenable to out of general fund paying a portion of that program?
I'm open to the conversation. Again, I am a huge supporter of branding Oregon agricultural products, particularly value-added products that can not only sell the Oregon brand, but create the kind of investment that we need for long-term economic development, particularly in our rural communities. So I'm definitely open to that. I will say, because everyone's going to see this, everyone's going to be asking the same thing. So we have to be cautious about how we do this. But understanding why the support has been set up the way it is and what would be a reasonable partnership is something I'm definitely open to having a conversation about.
Okay, I hit the wrong button.
You got to me first on that question, so I can't wait to all the other commodities, asking me the same question.
Okay. Thanks. So ag overtime has a potential to have very negative impacts as implemented here in Oregon. How might you as governor help farmers and ranchers with this issue?
So the final legislation on moving us forward on paying overtime for ag workers happened after I had left. But I'll be upfront, I was a strong supporter of making sure we figure something out, because we're in this, I think we have to do it from a moral perspective to say ag workers need to have opportunities for overtime. What I think, as far as I can tell from what was passed this past February, is that there is a glide path and a phasing in of getting to an overtime threshold that aligns us with Washington, California. And we created a financial assistance through upfront tax credits, is my understanding, to help adjust for that. What I've said to people across the board is, let's talk about how it's working. Let's talk about the impacts. Let's talk about, do we need to maintain that program, the assistance, longer via our tax system? Is that the right way to do it? I want to be able to make sure we can respect our ag workers and make sure, particularly smaller operators who don't have as much flexibility because of their smaller operation, can continue to do business in Oregon. So I think we have to watch it. have hard conversations, say, is this working? Is this actually keeping people, in business, but also, respecting ag workers? I have to be hopeful that we can figure it out. Honestly, it would be really nice for the federal government to fix this, so everybody's on an even playing field across the country. That would be the thing to do. But in the meantime, I don't think we can sit back and not try to do something here in Oregon. And that's what's been attempted.
Wolves, effective management of wolves is called for in the Oregon Wolf Management Plan. Yet ODF&W has not used the management tools afforded to them in the plan. How would you make sure this agency followed the Oregon Wolf Conservation Management Plan to effectively protect livestock?
Well, I think just asking hard questions. Again, I don't know every chapter and verse of the Wolf Management Plan. And I'll be upfront. I think however we do wolf management, it should be humane. Because honestly, I don't think being embroiled with lawsuit after lawsuit is also, cost effective, right? So how do you make sure we're doing it in a way that we're meeting the goals of protecting livestock in a reasonable fashion, but doing it in a humane way, so we're not, dealing with a whole bunch of lawsuits. So that's about what I can say right now about that. But I would, have to obviously go more into the details of what we are doing now or not doing.
Okay. ODA requested $10 million for an upstart for the state meat inspection program. The legislature gave $2 million in a year with record excess revenues. Is this an important program for the state to fund?
I do, and I was supportive of it. I think oftentimes people come in with requests and they get a portion of what they've asked for. I would predict with that 2 million, we're going to see some really strong results that will probably bring forth an additional investment, because I do think it's important. And I think there was a lot of good bipartisan work done to get that program put together.
Okay, last question. Governor Inslee of the state of Oregon and Congressman Simpson from Idaho have called for the removal of the lower Snake River dams. What is your position on these dams?
Currently, from what I gather, and again, I'm not in any of these conversations, is that the states are taking a comprehensive and collaborative approach to trying to figure this out. And I think we have to. Now, whether that means near-term removal of dams, I don't know, but I don't think we can't shy away from this conversation. We have spent billions of dollars trying to save our salmon, and it's not working. And we have to talk about these dams. Now, as a governor, my commitment is, again, making sure we hear from everyone, try to figure out what our goals are. This is not something that happens overnight, even if it were to go forward. But I think we just have too much at stake not to be discussing this. And if I have any little frustration, I think it's become a little bit black and white. It's like, well, we just can't do this. I think one side's like, take them down, the other side saying, we can't do it. I'm sorry, we have to have a discussion about this. And so I look forward to reading the report that just came out. I haven't had a chance to look at it yet to see what kind of framework they're bringing to this discussion, because it's an important one that affects a lot of people. And we need to do it right. So again, as a candidate, I don't have all the details, but that's my general take on it right now.
Tina, we really appreciate you getting on here today, answering some fairly tough questions. And we want to give you 5 minutes to wrap up here and tell us a little more about yourself and your campaign.
Well, I appreciate that. And you, as a candidate, you never know what people are going to ask. And, you ask some very specific questions, and I hope it's not seen that I'm, trying to dodge the answer at all. I can only talk about the way that I do my work as Speaker of the House for 9 years. That's a long time to work with all kinds of people with very different perspectives, being in very complex conversations in rooms with people saying, okay, put your stuff on the table. What is it you need? How do we work together? How do we come up with things that will actually make things better for Oregonians around the state. And that's what I've been doing as speaker. That's what I want to do as governor. I will be a governor for the entire state. Again, getting back to earlier comments, that means not being Salem centric, not being I-5 centric, talking to everybody around the state, making sure you're getting perspectives through our agencies and through my own staff, where we're hearing the multiple needs of the state, particularly in our rural communities, so people feel heard, validated, and also, even if at the end of the day we don't agree on all the aspects of the solution, that people feel heard and feel like they were part of the process. So what I did as speaker is what I'm going to do as governor. When I talk to Oregonians around the state, they just want things to work. And when I think about the top issues that are addressing, these aren't partisan issues at the end of the day. The fact that communities around our state don't have enough housing, and that too many Oregonians are unhoused, living on the streets or camping in, out in the woods or living in their RVs. That is an issue we all have to come together to work on and solve. That's a top priority. When I talk to people about their family members or themselves not being able to access mental health care or treatment for an addiction, that doesn't sit well with me. When you are ill, and in this case, whether it's a mental illness or an addiction issue, you need healthcare. And no matter where you are in the state, you should be able to find it. It should be affordable. It should be ready when you need it. I've been a big advocate for access to healthcare in all parts of our state in my entire time in public service, starting off trying to make sure kids are covered all the way to all adults. We have more access to telehealth, but we need providers in all parts of our state to meet the healthcare needs of our communities. And one of the big things that I will focus on as governor is mental health and addiction. My wife is a social worker. She's worked with people who have significant mental illness. We talk about the treatment that's not there for people. Again, that's not a partisan issue. That is about how do we take all these resources, and there are some significant resources in the system. How do we make sure they serve everybody in the state so people have the care they need? Those are the types of things. Housing and mental health issues are going to be a big issue for them. And then one thing that's very personal to me, and I think probably something that many of you could agree with, is how are we good stewards of the land when it comes to what's happening with climate change? Rural communities, ag communities in particular, are so impacted by what's been going on, from drought to wildfires. So we not only have to, as the next governor, help communities be resilient so they can survive the changes that are happening now, but also make sure Oregon is doing its part over the long term to reduce our carbon pollution. And I've said to people, everybody in the state has a role to play here. And let's start with the more populated urban areas. Look, Portland Metro needs to walk the talk of saying we're going to reduce our transportation emissions, getting more people in the buses, getting more people in the zero emission vehicles, more electrification so people can charge. Let's start there. And over time, how do we help rural communities move to different, cleaner vehicles and equipment? How do we make that happen? These things don't happen overnight, but I can tell you, if we don't get started, it's always easier to give yourself a glide path many more years. If we're trying, we will have to do this. I'd rather have 10, 15 years instead of 5 to do it, right? So let's have these conversations. How do we move to cleaner vehicles across the board? But in the short term, the more populated areas of the state is where I'm going to focus first, because there are a lot more people, a lot more pollution. We need to start working there first. So climate and how we all react as Oregonians to our responsibilities to take care of the land, take care of our planet, but do it in a way that will work for people is a goal of mine. And I look forward to working with you on that, because again, I don't think take care of our environment is a partisan issue at the end of the day. So I just got to say, I really appreciate everything you do. What you're going to get from me is someone who works hard, listens a lot, really works on the details. It's not enough to tell me, oh, that's going to work. I'm like, well, why is that going to work? Who's going to pay for it? Who's going to be impacted? How long is it going to take? Who's actually going to watch over and make sure it happens? Those are all the kind of questions I've always asked myself whenever I put together public policy. And as your governor, I'm going to be a chief cheerleader for the state, making sure that Oregon is respected, successful. Every part of our state has what it needs, because that's what it means for me to be a leader in our state. So I really appreciate the opportunity today. I figure the next conversations I'm going to have to like go do some reading because I clearly need to get up to speed on a few things. But you know what? That's just what part of the job is. So I'm looking forward to it. So thank you for the time today.
Yeah, thank you once again. And we'll be visiting more, I'm sure.
I hope so. I hope so. Well, everybody have a great day.
You too.